Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly through a story so delicate it might wilt if you look at it too hard. Picture this: moonlight silvering across jade-tiled rooftops, torchlight flickering on winding paths of crushed seashells, and in the hush of midnight, rows and rows of blooming peonies, thousands of them, each one perfectly groomed, trimmed, and worshipped. You're not dreaming yet. This is real. You're in the garden of a Tang Dynasty emperor, and the flowers here are more important than most of the people. In the shadows, silent figures move like ghosts, imperial gardeners tending their plants with the urgency of surgeons. They're not planting potatoes for dinner. They're maintaining a royal bloom schedule so rigid that a single early blossom could get someone promoted to guarding cows in the provinces. There's a peony variety named Sleepy Silk Maiden, and she apparently prefers her soil warm, her roots undisturbed, and exactly 3 spoonfuls of fermented apricot mulch a week. You're going to meet her. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting action or battles or even walking faster than a sleepy tortoise. This is 2 hours of garden logistics, flower emotions, bee conspiracies, and one very serious monk with a watering can. And somehow, you'll come to care deeply about all of it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop that in the comments if you're still awake by the end. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through a bamboo gate, the wood polished smooth by generations of hands, into the hidden imperial garden of Chang'an. It's late spring, and the peonies are in full display. These aren't your neighbour's backyard flowers. Each bloom is as wide as your face, layered with silken petals in impossible shades, midnight plum, sunset gold, creamy smoke, and a red so deep it seems to hum. A court poet once described them as moonlight wrapped in flesh. You pause near a stone lantern listening. The gardeners are still at work. In the Tang court, beauty never sleeps, and neither apparently do the men tasked with keeping it alive. Someone softly singing to a plant in the eastern bed. Probably the gardener who insists his peonies bloom better if they hear tragic folk ballads. This particular garden exists because of one emperor's insomnia. Xuanzong, who ruled from 712 to 756, couldn't sleep without the scent of peonies drifting into his chambers. The story goes that on one humid spring night, a chill draft pushed the fragrance from the garden through the lattice window, and the emperor slipped into the deepest sleep of his life. Since then, gardeners were ordered to ensure that bloom cycles aligned with the imperial rest schedule, and if the flowers didn't cooperate, well, that's why a few unlucky florists were reassigned to compost duty in Inner Mongolia. Historians still argue whether the emperor's obsession was purely sensory or also strategic. Was this about beauty or power disguised as petals? Some scholars point out that Tang emperors used lavish flower displays not only to impress foreign envoys, but also to distract noblemen from court politics. Why worry about taxes when the glory of crimson heaven is about to unfurl its 90-second petal? A sleepy bee bounces past your ear and settles into a pale lavender blossom. Even the bees here work the night shift. During bloom season, they're encouraged with diluted honey water and little trays of crushed osmanthus blossoms to keep their spirits up. There's a beekeeper named Wen who swears his hives respond better to soft lute music. Every evening he sits near the garden's edge plucking a tune that makes the bees sway in mid-air like tipsy dancers. He's become a legend among the staff, a bee bard if you will. You tiptoe deeper into the garden and find yourself in the Moon Pond Court, a circular bed around a shallow pool reflecting both the stars and the trembling pink of a variety called blushing swan in frost. A gardener stands knee-deep in the pond, rearranging lily pads not for their health, but to better reflect the peony colours. This, apparently, is feng shui for flowers. In the north corner you see one of the more extreme contraptions, a bamboo frame rigged with mirrors and thin silk screens to direct sunlight precisely onto one single plant. The flower's name, Golden Child of the Imperial Heart. It only opens when it receives exactly 5 hours of angled light between 9 and 2 o'clock. Gardeners rotate the screens like stagehands during a very slow opera. Of course, not every emperor had such a poetic obsession with plants. Xuanzong's love was legendary, but earlier Tang rulers were more practical. One emperor insisted on peonies in every garden simply because they required less water than the lemon trees he inherited. Later, Empress Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor, famously banished all peonies from the capital when one failed to bloom on command. That wasn't a metaphor. She literally kicked the flower out of town. Petal pettiness was real. There's a tiny plaque near one of the older bushes, marking the first peony to arrive in Chang'an. It came from Luoyang, by ox cart, bundled in silks and guarded by soldiers. Peonies weren't native to the city, and moving them safely over hundreds of miles was a feat of logistics involving rotating soil crates and hourly petal hydration checks. The peony made it. Most of the guards did not. The court blamed the weather, everyone else blamed the peony's attitude. By now, your shoes are damp from dew, and a nightingale has started chirping somewhere over the hedge. You pass a resting bench carved with poetry. In dreams, I walk the petal's edge, and wake with fragrance on my skin. You flop down onto the bench and yawn. You wouldn't have lasted a week as a Tang Dynasty gardener. These guys had to memorize 120 flower types, recite the bloom schedules for each season, and know exactly which bees hated which flowers. They brewed special compost teas, ran night drills for emergency cold snaps, and sang to the roots if a plant looked droopy. All this so the emperor could drift off to sleep. And now, so can you. You lean back on the poetry bench, trying to imagine how this all began. Surely the peony wasn't born with its royal entourage of bee butlers and sleepless gardeners. Once upon a time, this whole imperial flower circus started with a weed. You squint across the moonlit garden toward a scraggly plant in the neglected west corner. That one's here for contrast. The wild peony. Scrawny, blunt-petalled, vaguely annoyed-looking, a far cry from her silk-draped sisters. But this unimpressive wallflower is the mother of them all. Centuries before emperors gave their left slipper to smell a peony bloom, these plants grew wild in rocky, windswept hillsides, unbothered, unloved, and, let's be honest, kind of scruffy. People didn't grow them for show, they grew them for medicine. Roots boiled for liver problems, petals steeped for skin rashes, sap smeared on suspicious moles. That was the peony's original career path. Apothecary assistant. Legend says that the turning point came on a spring morning when a Tang court official sneezed so violently in the medicinal garden that he startled a bee, which then stung his horse, which then bolted into the herb beds, trampling most of them, but somehow sparing the peonies. When the emperor heard this, he decided the plant had divine favour, or maybe he just liked underdogs. Either way, the peony was promoted from root tonic to garden guest of honour. Historians still argue whether this story has even a grain of truth, or if it's one of those poetic inventions meant to elevate the humble. But we do know this. By the early Tang period, the peony had begun to appear in elite households, not just as a remedy, but as a decorative centrepiece, a flower-shaped status symbol. Once the upper class caught peony fever, there was no going back. Demand surged. Peony breeders, yes, that became a job title, started experimenting. They crossed wild varieties with imported ones from further west. They kept notes like alchemists charting how different soils, water types, and even musical exposure affected blooming. One scribe wrote that peonies exposed to flutes developed a more graceful droop. Meanwhile, Confucian scholars, who loved categorizing things more than they loved their own children, began ranking peonies by size, fragrance, bloom longevity, and moral character. Yes, you heard that right. Some peonies were considered upright and noble, while others had frivolous inclinations based on how flamboyantly they opened. You're not sure if this is adorable or exhausting. You shuffle along a gravel path, hands tucked behind your back like a miniature botanist emperor, and stop at a cluster of bushes labelled First Flame of Spring, Willow Whisper Red, and Granny's Secret Blush. Their petals are thick and velvety, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. They look like flowers drawn by someone trying very hard to impress an immortal. But even with their rising fame, peonies were not an easy sell. They demanded perfect conditions, just the right slope of soil, sun for only part of the day, water that had stood overnight to lose its impurities. Rain at the wrong moment could ruin a bloom, frost could halt a budding, and woe to the gardener who planted them near onions. Peonies, for whatever reason, found that deeply offensive. There's a story about one early peony keeper named Bao, who was so determined to tame the plant's tantrums that he moved into a tent beside his garden and refused to bathe during bloom season. He said it disrupted the scent balance. His neighbours moved away, but his peonies? Glorious. Another tale involves a scholar named Min, who tried grafting peonies onto plum tree roots in hopes of producing a double-season bloom. The result was a half peony, half-confused monstrosity that wilted itself out of shame. The experiment was never repeated. The tree died from embarrassment. The real breakthrough came when gardeners discovered that peonies thrived in slightly acidic soil, treated with powdered clamshell and fermented tea leaves. This happy accident, supposedly uncovered when a drunk monk tripped and spilled his dinner into a flower bed, changed everything. Yards that once struggled now exploded with blossoms, and monks everywhere were suddenly encouraged to stumble more. As the Tang Dynasty blossomed culturally, so did the gardens. Peonies became an emblem of wealth, femininity, and imperial taste. Having rare varieties in your courtyard was like owning a modern yacht, or an unnecessarily complicated coffee machine, and if yours bloomed earlier than your neighbours, well, you could enjoy a smug tea ceremony while they begged their buds to wake up. But here's the twist. It wasn't just emperors and aristocrats getting in on the action. Common folk too began sneaking peonies into window boxes and alley pots. Flower theft rose dramatically. Seed smugglers became a thing. One court official even lamented, "It is easier to guard gold than petals." A minor fringe tidbit, there was a short-lived fashion craze in Chang'an where people dyed their eyebrows with crushed peony petals. It didn't last long, mostly because it made everyone smell vaguely like compost. But for a brief period, peony brow was all the rage. Some portraits survive, showing ladies with arching red brows like upside-down flames. They look mildly surprised by their own choices. As you wander through this echo of ancient garden mania, you pass a broken sundial tucked behind a hedge. Carved into its base are the words, "What blooms today forgets tomorrow." It's oddly comforting. Peonies, for all their pomp, are temporary. Their bloom window is brief. 2, maybe 3 weeks if you're lucky. All that effort, the soil preparation, the composting, the whispering bees and tormented monks, for a moment of colour that fades almost as soon as it arrives. That ephemerality is part of the appeal. Tang poets obsessed over it. Their popular drinking game involved writing verses that compared a dying peony to various life regrets. Your face fades faster than peony moonlight was apparently considered a cutting insult. The wind rustles a patch of tall grass, and you hear a gardener nearby sigh. It's probably fatigue, or maybe reverence. After all, to serve the peony was to serve beauty itself. And in the Tang court, beauty was sacred, even if it had started its career as a stubborn little root in a dusty field. You close your eyes and breathe in. The scent is heavy, sweet, almost cloying, with something earthy underneath. You realise that despite all their transformation, all the breeding and soil science, deep down, peonies still remember what it felt like to grow wild. And somehow, that makes them even more royal. By now, your feet are damp from dew and crushed flower heads. Somewhere behind you, a gardener sneezes, probably from a pollen overdose, and mutters something about too much glory of morning flame in one bed. You nod, silently agreeing. Even peonies, when taken too seriously, can become a bit much. But tonight, you're not just admiring their colours or pretending to judge their moral character. You're tracing the real machinery behind their splendour, the secret life of Tang Dynasty gardeners. These weren't casual weed pullers with sun hats and lunch breaks. These were elite horticulturalists, flower strategists, and full-time peony whisperers with job descriptions longer than a Confucian scroll. Your path leads past a small shed. Inside, lit only by an oil lamp, a gardener sits cross-legged, mixing something in a clay bowl. Fermented apricot pits, mashed peach leaves, crushed oyster shells. No, he's not making soup. He's concocting one of the Empire's most prized gardening potions, Bloom Tonic No. 4. It's meant to coax late bloomers into flowering right before an imperial inspection. In extreme cases, it's been known to make a peony bloom too fast and collapse dramatically within a day, like a stage actor who peaked too early. This is where the magic, or madness, happens. Tang garden sheds were microlabs of experimentation. Gardeners logged everything: moon phases, bird calls, soil texture after rain, the smell of the air at sunrise. One eccentric head gardener insisted on sniffing the morning breeze each day to decide whether to water or chant instead. His plants did okay, his assistants went mildly insane. And the peony hierarchy within the garden. Oh, it was intense. Each plant had a rank. The emperor's personal blooms were referred to as honoured consorts. and they were treated with the kind of deference usually reserved for dowager empresses. They got silk wraps during windstorms, bathed roots in scented water, and occasionally received handwritten poems. Meanwhile, the lower-tier peonies, courtyard attendants, if you will, were used for practice pruning and bee training. Brutal. You find a weathered slate board leaning against a rock. Scratched into it are rotas for the upcoming bloom parade. Each gardener is assigned to a single peony. Their task? Ensuring that their plant blooms within a 3-day window, no earlier, no later. Too early, and the bloom fades before the emperor's walk. Too late, and it's like forgetting a royal birthday. There's no recovery. Historians still argue whether these bloom parades were purely aesthetic, or also a coded political signal. A perfectly synchronized garden was a symbol of imperial order. Every petal aligned, every bee on cue. A chaotic garden. That was dangerously close to metaphoric sedition. One rumour tells of a court minister who lost favour after a double bloom opened a day too early near the tea pavilion. The flower was blamed. The minister retired to a goat farm. Of course, coordinating all this required more than soil know-how. Tang gardeners used early climate hacks centuries ahead of their time. You step around a ring of clay pots buried halfway in the ground. These are thermal anchors. Sun-warmed during the day, they release heat overnight to keep the roots from chilling. One gardener nearby mutters, "The peonies get hot water bottles, I get stiff knees." You give him a sympathetic nod, a quirky but true tidbit. There was a short period during the late Tang era when gardeners tried peony perfume marination. They soaked flower buds in aromatic oils in an attempt to intensify their scent. The result was so potent it attracted every bee, moth, and mildly confused squirrel within a mile. The palace declared it a hazard and quietly shelved the practice. As you pass a small platform surrounded by flowering hedges, you overhear two senior gardeners arguing about shade strategy. One believes in rotating the canopy to mimic cloud cover. The other swears by silk parasols tied to bamboo rods. They debate in hushed voices as if the plants might be listening and judging. It's not entirely irrational. Tang gardeners treated peonies almost like sentient beings. They were known to whisper encouragement or mild threats. Bloom now, or I compost you, was both literal and motivational. And let's not forget the bees. Oh, the bees. In the Tang Dynasty, bee management was practically an art form. Beekeeper scrolls have been found with diagrams showing which peony types attract the most disciplined pollinators. There was a theory that bees, like scholars, preferred structured petals. Blossoms with symmetrical folds were pollinated faster. Whether or not that's true is still debated, but it led to centuries of selective breeding that shaped what peonies look like today. There's a beekeeper in the garden right now, seated under a lace-covered hat, watching his tiny fleet drift from bloom to bloom. He calls out little rhymes: blossom fair, nectar sweet, lead the bees on velvet feet. It sounds ridiculous. The bees love it. You duck under an archway draped in a climbing jasmine vine, and emerge in what the gardeners call the nursery, where young peonies are raised like aristocratic toddlers. Each sapling has a name tag, a soil diary, and a colour forecast. Some are bound for the emperor's viewing platform, others are destined for diplomatic gifting. That's right. Peonies weren't just decorative, they were Tang diplomacy in full bloom. An envoy from the Western Kingdoms once returned home with a gift of 12 rare cuttings, each wrapped in silk and escorted by a translator and 2 bodyguards. The flowers died halfway there. The emperor still considered it a successful peace offering. You pause beside one particularly radiant peony. White petals kissed with blush pink edges, dew pooling like pearls in its folds. Its label reads, "Morning bride of the 9th cloud." She's breathtaking. You get the sudden, irrational urge to apologise for stepping too loudly. Nearby, a junior gardener in training balances a tray of hand-mixed soil with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. His mentor watches with the grim patience of someone who's seen it all. "Peonies listen," he says without looking up. "You just have to learn the right silence." You're not sure what that means, but it sounds profound, and you pretend to understand. You sit on a flat rock, legs stretched, head tilted toward the stars. Somewhere far above, Chang'an's city lights flicker like tiny prayers. Down here, though, the universe contracts into this strange, fragrant bubble of floral ambition. These gardeners, their quiet rituals, their obsessive care, are the invisible hands behind the beauty the emperor takes for granted. No one bows to them at court. No one writes odes to their backaches or swollen fingers, but every perfect bloom, that's their signature. And in the end, their devotion isn't just to the emperor, or even the flowers. It's to the idea that beauty, however fleeting, is worth the trouble. The moon slid lower in the sky now, casting long silver shadows across the crushed stone paths. A soft breeze rattles a row of chimes shaped like petals, barely audible over the steady buzz of bees, still dutifully visiting the last open blossoms like caffeine-addled accountants. You round a bend and find yourself at the edge of a quiet pavilion overlooking the imperial pond, and on its still, mirror-like surface, peonies, not floating, not tossed by accident, but arranged, meticulously, ceremonially into drifting clusters. You're not hallucinating. This is peony rafting, a bizarre and beautiful ritual from the heart of the Tang Dynasty, where floating flowers were used as living poems, party decorations, or depending on the occasion, subtle insults. Let's rewind. You see, as peony mania took hold in Tang society, there was an increasing need to show them off in more than just pots or beds. And since emperors and nobles spent half their spring lounging near water, writing poems, sipping plum wine, judging each other's fashion choices, the natural next step was to put the peonies on the water. A favourite noble pastime was the flower boat banquet. Picture it. Elegant boats decked with silks and lanterns, drifting lazily along palace canals or estate ponds, and on these boats, peonies in ornate vases. But more impressively, the water itself would be seeded with loose blooms, clipped just beneath the calyx so they'd float upright, gliding like royal ghosts. The guests competed to guess the peony's variety by scent and silhouette. Winners got plum liquor, losers got gently shamed in verse. Historians still argue whether the first floating peony display was a genuine artistic epiphany, or just the accidental result of a bored court lady dropping her flower arrangement in the pond. Either way, it caught on like wildfire. Within a few decades, entire manuals were written on aquatic flower choreography. Yes, that was a thing. You lean over the railing and notice bamboo rings on the pond surface. These were used to corral the drifting blooms into patterns, hearts, waves, even the Tang character for fragrance. And while it may seem frivolous, it had a deeper purpose. The way the petals moved, touched, or separated was thought to mirror human emotions. A cluster drifting apart, a sign of forgotten love, a single blossom circling endlessly, longing without resolution. You know, the usual romantic gloom that ancient poets thrived on. One fringe fact? There was a short period during Empress Wu Zetian's reign, yes, that Wu Zetian, when peonies were banned from water display after a particularly competitive noblewoman used floating blooms to mock a rival's failing marriage. She arranged a lonely peony to slowly rotate counterclockwise, an omen of decay, and it set off a passive-aggressive poetry war that lasted 6 months. The Empress was not amused. A gardener nearby hauls up a thin net and carefully skims away the wilting flowers from earlier in the day. Fresh blooms are added by hand, one by one, clipped precisely for optimal float angle. It's meticulous work, but oddly hypnotic, like cleaning up a dream so it stays dreamy. Across the pond, there's another kind of display, a low stone fountain shaped like a tortoise, water trickling down its shell into a carved channel that runs the length of the pavilion. Floating peony petals are released upstream and slowly drift past seated guests, who are expected to compose a short verse before the petals reach the final bowl. No pressure or anything. And then there's the drinking game version, called Petal Drift. It goes like this. A blossom is floated toward you in a small lacquered saucer. If it bumps your cup, you must drink, then add a rhyme to the group poem. Miss your rhyme? You refill everyone else's wine. One particularly notorious party ended with the emperor himself giggling uncontrollably and composing a 4-line poem about a drunken bee falling into his cup. The bee survived. The poem, surprisingly decent. But for all its performative elegance, peony rafting also carried a philosophical undertone. Tang aesthetics were deeply tied to Buddhist and Taoist ideas. Impermanence, the illusion of control, the beauty in natural decay. A flower blooming in still water was the ultimate metaphor. Beautiful, yes, but also unrooted, delicate. At the mercy of the slightest ripple, a monk once wrote, "The anchored flower knows its soil, the drifting flower knows its fate." You sit down on a carved stone bench beside the water's edge, mesmerised. The pond reflects not just the flowers, but the stars. For a moment you can't tell where sky ends and water begins. Peonies drift between constellations. The whole garden feels like a painting that forgot it wasn't real. There's another reason floating flowers mattered. These displays allowed courtiers to flex their knowledge of floral lineage. You had to recognise not just colour or form, but origin. Was this the elusive silver dancer of Westxiang, or just a pale cousin of jade swan beneath snow? Getting it wrong in front of a superior could cost you. Not your life. This isn't that kind of bedtime story, but definitely your invitation to next year's spring banquet, which frankly was almost as bad. One unusual tidbit. A few gardeners experimented with floating unopened buds, hoping they'd bloom mid-raft. Most failed miserably, but one lucky gardener discovered that if the bud was wrapped in warmed silk and fed a dab of sesame oil, it might open gently as it floated. They called it sunrise on water. The technique was never widely adopted, but the name lived on as a poetic metaphor for optimism against odds. Or very confusing skincare. You pull your robe a little tighter, the breeze has picked up, but the flowers remain undisturbed. There's a serenity here, a deliberate slowness that feels rare and precious. No one rushes, no one checks a sundial. Even the bees seem to be gliding, not working. You think of the gardeners again. How after weeks of work they'd come to these ponds at night just to watch the flowers float. Not to impress anyone, not even to document anything, just to watch. Maybe that was the whole point. Not the bloom itself, but its motion across water. A reminder that beauty doesn't have to stay put to matter. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the soft plop of another flower being added to the pond. A whisper of silk, a careful sigh, the creak of the wooden platform. Somewhere in the distance, a court musician plays a few lazy notes on a guqin. Not a performance, just a lullaby for the drifting blooms. And as you drift too, nestled in the scent of wet petals and old wood, you realise something that would have delighted those Tang poets. Sometimes the flower doesn't need to be in the soil. Sometimes it just needs a little water, a little moonlight, and someone willing to watch it float. You don't remember falling asleep, but you must have. One moment you were watching peonies bob across a moonlit pond, and the next, well, here you are, blinking in the soft light of pre-dawn, the colour of the sky shifting from deep lavender to the faintest peach. And you're not alone. Just ahead, the gardeners are already awake, shuffling about with purposeful slowness, like ghosts with calluses. They work in near silence, save for the occasional yawn or polite cough. No talking before tea. It's a sacred rule. One figure gestures for you to follow, and you do, still half dreaming, into a sunken courtyard lined with peony beds, arranged in near-perfect concentric circles. In the centre, a raised platform painted in faded reds and golds sits empty, for now. But not for long. You've just stumbled into one of the Tang Dynasty's lesser-known obsessions, the dawn viewing ceremony. See, while evening flower banquets were poetic and indulgent, dawn viewings were considered spiritual. They were quiet, disciplined, and reserved for people who wore robes with names like Whispered Rain and Grey Lotus. This was the domain of scholar officials, retired poets, and one or two suspiciously rich candle merchants who always managed to get invites. These gatherings had one goal: to witness the precise moment when a peony unfurled under first light. And yes, that actually happens. Some peony varieties, especially the more temperamental tea-face types, bloom in a sudden audible release, a whisper pop. You might think it's myth, until you hear it. The gardeners believe there's a kind of reverence in being present for this. One tells you, without blinking, if you hear a bloom open, you've been forgiven by spring. You nod, because arguing with a man holding pruning shears before breakfast seems like a bad choice. Now here's where things get strangely competitive. Each peony selected for the dawn viewing is chosen based on months of preparation. Soil quality, sun exposure, even how often the gardener talked to it, yes, that's a thing. All factor in. They're evaluated like contestants at a beauty pageant crossed with a meditation retreat. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were spiritual rituals or just refined ego contests. One theory suggests the entire tradition began when a particularly grumpy magistrate challenged a rival to find one flower more patient than my silence. The rival responded by breeding a peony that bloomed only at dawn. The magistrate retired in quiet humiliation. Poetry was written. You settle on a low wooden stool offered by a passing servant. It's still cool to the touch. All around, attendees begin to sit in concentric arcs, facing the central flower platform. There's an unspoken dress code, muted colours, light fabrics, preferably with at least one embroidered bird somewhere. A woman to your left wears a robe so faintly pink it could be mistaken for mist. She holds a fan. It's painted with a single blooming peony and the character for breath, Seus. As the sky lightens, one lone musician begins plucking a guzheng, the notes so slow and deliberate they feel like sighs stretched into string. A tea boy silently pours steaming green tea into shallow cups. No one drinks yet. First comes the bloom, and then, there it is. You hear it before you see it. A soft chuck, like a sigh escaping velvet. A ripple of breath passes through the crowd. Eyes sharpen, necks crane. Right in the centre of the platform, a single peony, pale violet edged with ivory, quivers. A moment ago it was tightly curled. Now it begins to unfurl petal by petal as the sun peeks over the eastern roofline. It's not a grand explosion. It's more like a long exhale after holding your breath for hours. You feel irrationally like crying. Or maybe that's just sleep deprivation mixed with floral-induced humility. The head gardener, an old man with hands like tree bark, bows slightly. "This one," he murmurs, "is called First Memory of My Mother's Hairpin." Someone nearby gasps. A few others begin quietly composing poems in their lap scrolls. A teenager to your right furiously sketches the bloom with charcoal. His mentor frowns and adjusts his elbow. No pressure, kid. This kind of cultural performance wasn't just indulgence. It served a real, if indirect, political purpose. Tang emperors encouraged these early morning flower viewings to reinforce ideals of patience, harmony, and cultivated taste. To appreciate the moment a bloom opens requires presence, silence, and respect. Exactly the values a Confucian society wanted from its bureaucrats and elite. Peonies weren't just flowers, they were a moral test, and yet it was also personal. One fringe gardener's diary tells of a nobleman who built a mirrored dome over a peony bed so he could watch the flowers open from all angles at once. It didn't work, because the mirrors freaked out the bees and caused a tiny panic, but still, A for effort. The ceremony winds down with the gentle passing of tea. Each person sips slowly, watching the light strengthen. By now, several blooms have opened, as if encouraged by the example of their brave friend in the centre. It's the plant kingdom's equivalent of applause. You stretch your legs, now tingling from sitting cross-legged too long. The woman with the fan catches your eye and smiles. "The first bloom always lies," she says cryptically, then stands and vanishes into the soft crowd of early risers. You decide not to question it. Too early for riddles. Before you leave the courtyard, one of the assistant gardeners gives you a thin slip of paper. It's not a poem, it's a bloom log, meticulously documenting which peonies opened and at what time. Apparently every dawn viewing has a written record. Some go back centuries. Entire debates have unfolded over whether Blush Immortal of Shanyin bloomed at 5:12 or 5:15 during the 700 ceremony. The tension was real. By now the garden is fully awake. Sunlight filters through the canopy and lights up the dew-slick petals like jewels. And you realise something. All this care, all this ceremony, it's for something that might last a day, maybe two. Then the petals fall, the logs are stored, and the cycle starts again. But isn't that the whole point? The Tang Dynasty didn't grow peonies for permanence. They grew them for the precise, fleeting, exquisite moment they opened, when everything else fell silent. You stand at the gate of the courtyard, tea still warm in your hand, and glance back one last time. That single peony in the centre still shimmers slightly. It's done blooming. But for a moment it held the whole world's breath. There's something oddly satisfying about watching people argue with vegetables. You see it now, a gardener deep in conversation with a peony root the size of a small melon. He's whispering, coaxing, threatening, maybe all three. Nearby, a second gardener is digging in the dirt like it just insulted his mother. Welcome to the backstage chaos of Tang peony cultivation. After the delicate dawn viewings and elegant pond banquets, you'd think peony life was all silk and poetry. But no, behind every perfect bloom is a crew of sunburnt obsessives who spend months elbow-deep in soil. Today, you're following them, down the rows, past the compost bins, and into the beating heart of Tang horticultural madness. And yes, madness is the right word. See, growing peonies for the Tang court wasn't just gardening, it was strategy, politics, a touch of alchemy. These weren't hobbyists, these were plant whisperers with the pressure of national aesthetic identity on their backs. Their goal, perfection, their tools, shovels, sheep dung, and secrets passed down in coded poems. You pause beside a stack of earthenware pots, each one holding a tuberous mass that looks less like a flower to be, and more like something you'd wrestle in a fever dream. Peonies grow from roots that resemble tangled yams, and getting them to sprout, even more to thrive, was a seasonal science with no room for error. First rule, timing. Plant too early and the roots rot. Too late and you miss the spring bloom. Gardeners in Chang'an even had special water clocks calibrated to peony growth cycles, marking days with ceramic tokens shaped like petals. Miss a token? Miss your bloom, and good luck explaining that to the Empress. Second rule, location, location, location. Tang-era growers knew that peonies loved morning sun but hated wind. So entire gardens were engineered around airflow. Some elite estates even hired geomancers, feng shui experts, to position each bed according to cosmic energy flow. Because obviously, your peony's chi alignment could make or break your social reputation. One mainstream fact, the imperial city of Chang'an boasted more than 50 dedicated peony gardens during its peak. Some were public viewing parks, others private estates. But the real jewels? The micro-gardens hidden inside bureaucrats' homes. Tiny courtyards with a single obsessively nurtured plant, guarded like a family heirloom. Imagine explaining to your dinner guest that no, the food will be served after everyone pays respects to the peony. You stop beside a set of raised beds covered in oiled silk awnings. The gardener peeks under one and quickly shoos you back. Too early, he mutters. They're dreaming still. Apparently the seedlings are like cranky children. Wake them too soon and they sulk for weeks. Here's the quirky bit. Tang gardeners developed peony lullabies. Not kidding. Simple 5-note melodies played on bamboo flutes, meant to encourage calm sprouting. One noble family went so far as to hire a blind musician to perform for the flowers twice daily. Results? Dubious. But the peonies did bloom early that year, and the musician was gifted a horse, a gold fan, and a title he didn't fully understand. You watch as compost is spread in delicate patterns. Sheep dung, decomposed tea leaves, and powdered oyster shell. Yes, peonies are picky eaters. One recipe involves soaking banana peels in rice water and whispering a wish into the jar. Was it superstition? Science. Historians still argue whether these rituals had measurable horticultural impact or just kept the gardeners emotionally stable. Another gardener hands you a tiny brush and points to a tightly closed bud. Dust the ants off, he says. You stare blankly. Apparently ants love peony buds. They're drawn to the sweet sap, and while they don't harm the plant, they do ruin the aesthetic. For Tang nobles, a single ant on a blossom was grounds for replacing the entire arrangement. So, gardeners used brushes made from goat eyelashes to gently evict the little freeloaders. You try it. The ant glares at you. You brush harder. Mid-morning arrives, and the light shifts. Gardeners hustle now, adjusting shade cloths and watering schedules like meteorologists with trowels. They speak in code. East face to sleep. Red lady sighs by noon. Moon dancer thirsty but shy. You begin to understand. Each plant has a personality, a rhythm. They're not just flowers. They're drama queens. There's an entire section of the garden devoted to problem peonies. Those that bloom off-season, refuse to open, or bloom too early and then wilt in protest. One notorious variety called Ghost Pearl is infamous for blooming only during fog. Tang records show a gardener who simulated fog with boiling teapots and crushed mint leaves. He was eventually promoted to assistant overseer of court aesthetics. That's a real job, by the way. Now, the elite growers, the real masters, were known as peony commanders. Not an official title, but a respected one. These were men and women who could coax a triple bloom from a single stalk, who knew how to graft white petals onto red roots and produce variegated blossoms that shimmered like silk. Some even experimented with scent infusion, burying citrus rinds near the roots to flavour the perfume. Of course, not all experiments went well. One fringe account tells of a misguided attempt to dye peonies blue by feeding them copper-dyed rice water. The result? Sickly plants, blue-tinged slugs, and a brief but memorable shortage of acceptable garden poetry. Still, the innovations continued. By the late Tang period, there were more than 200 named cultivars, each with unique characteristics: petal count, fragrance, blooming time, spiritual symbolism. Some were bred purely for court presentations, others for export as diplomatic gifts. There's even record of a peony variety developed exclusively for a eunuch official whose garden faced north. It bloomed sideways, out of spite probably. You kneel beside a grower gently repotting a root mass. His movements are slow, meditative, like he's handling a sleeping child. He murmurs to the soil, not words, just sound. He glances up. "You want bloom?" he says. "Talk first, dig later." Seems fair. By now the sun is hot enough to raise steam off the stone paths. You retreat under the shade of a willow, watching as the gardeners continue their careful ballet. It's not fast, it's not flashy, but it is full of intent. Every motion, every layer of mulch, every whispered insult to a lazy bud, done with care. And you realise something. These people aren't just growing flowers, they're preparing performances. The garden is a stage. The bloom, the applause, and the soil, that's the script rewritten every season, knowing full well the ending never changes. But still they plant, still they whisper, still they wait. You return to the garden after a short nap under a fragrant magnolia. Eyes still heavy but drawn back by a subtle shift in atmosphere. The air smells different now, warmer, heavier, laced with a syrupy perfume that clings to the breeze. Something's happening, and if you squint just right you'll see it too, bees. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Not a swarm, but a polite procession, zigzagging across the garden like tiny aerial scholars on a mission. The Tang Dynasty's most underappreciated workforce has clocked in. Bees weren't just tolerated in Tang gardens, they were courted, respected, practically wooed. These were not shoo-them-away pests. These were fuzzy-winged employees with a critical role to play in the performance of the peony. You stroll past a low stone wall lined with squat wooden boxes. Beekeepers attending their hives, dressed not in modern veils or suits, but in loosely draped gauze and wide-brimmed hats. One man is gently smoking a hive, not to drive the bees off, but to calm their family arguments, as he puts it. You choose not to dig deeper into that metaphor. Now here's your mainstream fact of the hour. Tang Dynasty gardens often included dedicated bee corridors. These were narrow rows planted with nectar-heavy flowers, clovers, jasmine, and early blooming herbs, that acted like nectar highways leading bees directly to the peonies once they flowered. The idea? Train the bees early, guide them gently, give them snacks along the way. And let's be clear, the bees were essential not because the peonies needed pollination to bloom, many ornamental varieties were sterile, but because the presence of bees was believed to enhance the flower's spiritual aura. A peony that attracted bees was a peony that carried harmony in its scent. You crouch beside one of the hives and listen. It hums with a rhythmic droning, a tiny orchestra of wings and purpose. The beekeeper beside you, a stooped man with fingers like dry twigs, offers you a lump of wax wrapped in mulberry paper. "Scent of 10,000 flowers," he says. You sniff it. He's not wrong. It smells like a memory you haven't had yet. The Tang were early masters of apiary aesthetics. Beeswax was prized not just for candles, but for medicinal salves and, more surprisingly, for polishing the lacquer trays used in flower presentations. The tray must glow like the petal's intention, one text insists. That's poetic nonsense, but also weirdly persuasive. Here's your quirky tidbit. One court noble in 763 CE reportedly wore a pendant made of peony honeycomb sealed in resin. He claimed it attracted beautiful conversation. Whether that meant eloquent women or bees, no one's quite sure. You walk deeper into the bee section of the garden. It's less polished here, a little wilder. The flowers less ornamental, more chaotic. Lavender spikes, camellia clumps, fields of mustard blossom, all carefully planted to keep the bees fed throughout the year. Because even when the peonies sleep, the bees don't. There's a side debate in Tang literature that's oddly relevant, whether bees prefer purebred or hybrid peonies. Historians still argue whether pollinators could sense the true lineage of a flower and avoid crossbreeds. Some beekeepers claim their bees turned their fuzzy backs on artificially coloured blossoms. Others insisted hybrids produced a more intoxicated hum. You wander over to a flat stone bench and sit, watching the bees spiral through sunbeams. A few land nearby, twitching their legs and grooming their antennae. You stay very still. They don't seem interested in you, which is reassuring. You're not covered in nectar after all. You hope. One of the younger gardeners joins you, carrying a tray with 2 tiny cups of mead. Yes, honey wine was a garden favourite among off-duty workers. You take a sip. It tastes like fermented afternoon. Sweet, warm, slightly dangerous. He tells you a story about peony thieves, not people, but bees. In some areas, bees were trained using peony scent soaked into cotton swabs, gradually introducing them to specific beds. A bee that returned to the wrong flower bed too often, well, they weren't punished exactly, but they did get moved to training hive duty. Yes, bee boot camp was apparently a thing. Some Tang poems refer to bees as flower monks, ascetics who live on the essence of beauty and never rest. Others paint them as secret messengers of the gods, carrying petal gossip from one courtyard to another. One verse reads, "The bee who lingers on my blossom returns with news of her perfume, and I, jealous of a petal, wait for him like spring. It's ridiculous. It's lovely. You sip more mead. As afternoon deepens, the air gets heavier. The bees move slower now, buzzing in lazy spirals. This is prime nectar time, and the peonies know it. Their petals have opened wider in the heat, releasing an invisible perfume plume that seems to hypnotize everything nearby, humans included. You walk to a bed of late bloomers, white peonies with coral centres that look dipped in sherbet. The bees seem to love these, crawling into the blossoms until all you see is a pair of kicking legs. Somewhere, a gardener swats at a passing moth. "Wrong guest," he mutters. Tang hospitality had standards, even for insects. It's worth noting that Tang emperors themselves took a passing interest in beekeeping. Emperor Xuanzong, during his less politically chaotic days, once kept a hive in the Daming Palace. He believed bees could predict the temperament of officials. If a visiting minister disturbed the hive, he was said to lack natural harmony. One courtier tripped and got stung twice. He was reassigned to border patrol. The practical benefits of bees were matched by their symbolic weight. Bees represented diligence, cooperation, and seasonal order. And in the Taoist philosophy, popular among Tang scholars, bees embodied the virtue of wu wei, effortless action. They worked without struggle, moved with nature, lived in quiet service to the world. You lie back in the grass now, buzz filling your ears, watching clouds drift behind petals. One bee lands on your sleeve, sits for a moment, then lifts off again. It's a tiny gesture, but you feel chosen, or at least politely acknowledged by the insect monarchy. Nearby, the gardeners begin to hum low wordless tones that seem to match the bees' rhythm. It's not a chant, it's a shared moment. Bees, blossoms, and humans briefly on the same wavelength. You close your eyes. Somewhere a bloom quivers, somewhere else a bee chooses it. And for now, that's enough. A splash, a flutter, then silence, like the garden's taken a deep breath and held it. You're standing now beside a series of tiled channels winding through the estate like thin blue veins, artificial streams engineered to mimic mountain brooks. They gurgle gently between peony beds and under little footbridges painted with faded cranes and dragons. It's not just for ambience. These waterways are a critical part of the peony garden's secret weapon, controlled irrigation. Now, you might not think water has a personality, but Tang gardeners would beg to differ. In their world, water wasn't just hydration, it was attitude. Was it rushing and proud, like river-fed snowmelt from the western hills, or slow and meditative, drawn from shaded stone wells beneath the city walls? Each had its own effects on plants. One made peony roots bold, the other made them poetic. Yes, they actually said that. Mainstream fact. Tang Dynasty horticultural manuals, yes, there were entire scrolls devoted to gardening, include detailed guidelines on water temperature, source, and mood. Some went so far as to label the best watering hours for different peony varieties. Early red blossoms, just before dawn, white double blooms, wait until the water sings, which probably meant afternoon, but no one really agrees. And of course, there's an ongoing scholarly brawl about this. Historians still argue whether those precise watering instructions had measurable botanical benefits, or if the Tang were just a little bit high on their own metaphors. Either way, those gardeners stuck to their watering scripts like Confucius had personally written them. You kneel by one of the channels, dipping your fingers in. The water's cool, startlingly so considering the summer heat. That's because this estate, like many high-end Chang'an properties, includes a cold spring cistern buried beneath the kitchen yard. Pipes made of bamboo and sealed clay ferry, that precious chill to the roots of the emperor's favourite flower. The logic? Warm air, cold drink, same as a fine court poet. You assume that made sense back then. As you rise, a small boy rushes past, arms full of terracotta pitchers, each marked with a character for the direction it came from. North Spring, East Creek, South Well. The water, it seems, must not only be cold or fresh or slow, it must be directionally pure. East water, for instance, was associated with early blooming. South water with pigment intensity. West water was for petal longevity, whatever that means. North water, avoided. It was said to carry ghost energy. You follow him to a corner of the garden where peonies droop in the sun like overheated dancers. A gardener carefully pours the contents of each jar around the base of select plants, then immediately shades them with paper umbrellas. Not for you, not for the gardeners, for the flowers. Tang umbrellas for tang flowers. Now, time for something a little more fringe. In the early 800s, a curious treatise appeared in Chang'an titled The Water Sutra of the Five Petal Realms. Attributed to a half-mad monk named Liwen, who claimed to have been taught by talking frogs, the text suggested that certain water patterns, spiraled, rippled, or poured in verse, could change the emotional outcome of a flower's bloom. Yes, emotional outcome. According to Liwen, if you recited a sad poem while watering, your peony would bloom droopily. If you clapped 3 times and sang a rice harvest tune, it would open with mirthful symmetry. Naturally, no two scholars agree on whether Liwen was being serious, metaphorical, or just making fun of his own patrons, but the treatise found an audience, and yes, it was widely tested in gardens, to mixed results and many confused bees. The sound of moving water surrounds you now. A gardener turns a small stone crank, adjusting the flow rate of a thin canal that loops around a pond shaped like a crescent moon. This isn't just for convenience, it's theatre. These water systems were part of a garden's choreography. At a banquet, a noble might raise a silk fan, and a hidden attendant would open a sluice, sending a cascade through a jade trough that set tiny bells jingling. Even more extra? Floating candles in little petal-shaped boats, launched upstream to drift past the peonies at just the right time. Because nothing says "welcome to my garden" like engineering a miniature river ballet. You pass a low wall covered in creeping vines, behind which is the compost quarter. It smells earthy, maybe a little proud. Gardeners here experiment with moisture retention. Water is gossip, one woman says, holding up a moss-lined clay pot. It goes where it's not wanted unless you give it secrets. She smiles, then throws a ladle of pond water into a bin filled with citrus peels and rice husks. Now it listens. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Tang gardeners believed peonies bloomed better after hearing the sound of bubbling water while being watered, so they buried ceramic whistles beneath the soil that would sing soft notes as water passed through. Imagine it. Flowers being serenaded by their own irrigation system. It's like a spa day crossed with a haunted wind chime. By now your sandals are wet, a necessary hazard of the water path. You pause by a bamboo sluice box to wring out your hem and notice that even the stones beneath your feet have been arranged to suggest rippling motion. The garden is built to echo water's rhythms, nothing in a straight line, nothing abrupt, just curves, flow, hush. You reach a more shaded grove where the air is cool and thick with silence. The stream here is narrower, slower, its surface broken only by fat koi and the occasional dragonfly. This is the resting water, meant not for irrigation but for reflection, literal and emotional. Tang nobles often wrote poetry beside these slow bends, using the peonies as inspiration and the water as metaphor. There's a legend, whispered by gardeners and probably invented after one too many cups of mead, that a jealous poet once cursed a stream for mirroring his rival's more beautiful flowers. The water, in turn, refused to reflect anything but clouds for 3 full years. It's nonsense, but here in this garden, you're not entirely sure it didn't happen. The day leans into late afternoon, and the irrigation slows. Gardeners close the spouts, plug the channels with carved gourd stoppers, and give the remaining thirsty plants a few last drops from gourd ladles that have been warmed in the sun. The final watering is called the sigh, a single stream poured carefully, slowly, without noise. It's not about moisture anymore, it's about grace. The plant gets its drink. The gardener says nothing. The water trickles, and that's the end. Tomorrow, it begins again. It's just after the final watering when the light begins to shift. Not darker, exactly, but softer, like the world has just exhaled through silk. You find yourself back near the edge of the imperial estate, at a long corridor flanked by low wooden buildings, each shaded by bamboo slats. This is the sorting zone, the backstage, the moment when peonies leave the soil and enter society. Here, petals meet protocol. You step lightly over bundled reeds and narrow baskets as court attendants hurry past, robes fluttering and hands careful. A thick scent hangs in the air, peony mixed with camphor, ink and dust. In one corner, a man is hunched over a stone table, trimming stems with a blade so thin it looks like moonlight. Every motion is deliberate. If the stem isn't cut at the proper angle, it won't sit straight in the lacquer trays. And if it doesn't sit straight, the harmony of the display is ruined. And if the harmony is ruined, well, someone in the Bureau of Rights will definitely write a poem about it. And not a flattering one. Your mainstream fact. The Tang Imperial Court had strict regulations around flower presentation. Peonies selected for display had to be of approved lineage, shape and pigment clarity. A list from the Kaiyuan era includes categories like sleeve-sized flame and snowborn fan, each with rigid specifications for how many petals were acceptable and what shade of pink constituted joyful dusk. Deviate, and your flower might end up decorating the bathhouse instead of the banquet. And who decided what counted as joyful dusk? Well, that's where the imperial inspectors came in. Yes, there were actual flower inspectors, and yes, they were insufferably picky. Most were poets or scholars with more opinions than field experience, tasked with judging whether a flower was philosophically upright. No, seriously. There's a recorded case of a peony being rejected for having ambivalent posture. You try not to take that personally. One inspector walks past now, holding a scroll, a brush, and an expression of grave disappointment. He pauses at a row of freshly clipped blooms, then sighs loudly and mutters, "Decadent." You're not sure if that's a good thing or a floral insult. Either way, the gardener beside him looks crushed, but it's not all scowling and sighs. A younger apprentice leads you to a row of tables where peonies are being sorted not by appearance, but by fragrance. Each blossom is gently sniffed, waved beneath a silk cloth, then rated according to a scale of entirely subjective terms. Mountain echo, dream under lacquer, melancholy after incense, and of course the dreaded kitchen ghost. You're offered a sniff of one rated imperial dawn. It smells purple, in a good way. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tang nobles believed that a peony's scent could be altered by proximity to particular incense smoke before harvesting. So, gardeners sometimes waved lit sticks of aloes wood or clove beneath the plants in the week before cutting, claiming it inspired the fragrance nerves. Modern botanists would have some notes, but hey, science was still a few dynasties away from arguing back. And speaking of incense, one corner of the sorting zone is devoted entirely to fragrance matching. Court incense masters arrive with samples and try to pair each peony with the right background aroma. Too strong, and the flower gets drowned out. Too subtle, and the peony seems lonely. You overhear one saying, "This blossom is clearly a sandalwood companion with jasmine ambitions." No one questions it. Historians still argue whether these incense pairings were based on any botanical reality, or were just another layer of aristocratic performance art. What's clear is that it mattered, to everyone involved. A poorly matched scent could ruin a banquet's theme, much like a clashing musical note or a soup that arrives tepid. Near the back wall, you find a curious set of tools, small ivory calipers used to measure petal spacing, tinted lenses used to detect unwanted bruises on white peonies, and something that looks suspiciously like a magnifying mirror from a backstage dressing room. For checking symmetry, explains a stern woman with a feathered hat and the confidence of a drill sergeant. She plucks one bloom from the pile, turns it slowly and murmurs, "Too flirtatious." Back it goes. You notice, as the inspection continues, that the rejected flowers aren't discarded. Instead, they're taken to a lower table, where they're sorted again. Not for display, but for dye extraction, tea infusions, and perfumed oils. Nothing is wasted. Even in imperial circles, beauty has a second act. You watch as one gardener places the selected blooms into specially carved wooden cradles lined with silk. These are not transport boxes. they're conversation starters. Each cradle will be hand-carried to the banquet halls, with a slip of poetry tucked beneath the stems. Some are classic couplets, others are new verses composed by the flower judge on duty. It's half shipping label, half love letter. You try writing one, it's not good. You quietly crumple it and tuck it into your sleeve. The flower deserves better. At the final table, you find something truly peculiar. A set of miniature fans made from pressed peony petals, lacquered and mounted on sticks no longer than your hand. These are whispers, silent favours handed to honoured guests at garden parties. According to rumour, the emperor once received one that had been scented with secret ink, revealing a hidden love poem when warmed by breath. You breathe on one. Nothing happens. You pretend it did. Evening settles in. The light is peach-coloured now, glowing through bamboo shades and casting long shadows over the sorting floor. You step outside and find a row of attendants lining up with trays, each holding an approved bloom. The chosen peonies are ready. They've passed inspection, survived opinionated poets, and made it to the final stretch. They'll be paraded through the banquet hall like royalty. People will argue over them. Poems will be composed about them. Jealous glances will be cast. And then, like all things imperial, they'll wilt and be replaced. But for tonight, they are the main event. You trail behind the last attendant, watching as he carries his peony down a lantern-lit corridor. It sways slightly with each step, perfectly balanced, absurdly dignified. It is somehow a flower with an entourage. And you get to follow it. The banquet hall is alive with muted chatter and the rustle of silk robes, but your eyes are fixed on the procession of peonies, carried carefully like precious guests. The scent of the flowers mingles with incense and the faint hint of spiced wine, creating an atmosphere both intoxicating and delicate, like a secret whispered just below the surface. You find yourself drawn to a long lacquer table set against a wall, painted with scenes of blossoming trees and fluttering butterflies. Here, the peonies will be arranged for the evening's display, and you watch as attendants position each bloom with the precision of jewellers. No leaf out of place, no petal askew. Mainstream fact: the Tang Dynasty was famous for its elaborate court banquets where flowers played a starring role. Not just decoration, but a language of status and taste. Peonies in particular were so prized that only certain varieties were allowed at the emperor's table. The flower was a symbol of wealth, power and feminine beauty, woven deeply into poetry, fashion and ceremony. You can almost hear the low murmur of poets and courtiers as they lean in to admire the floral arrangements, trying to guess which peony came from which estate, which gardener, or which secret water channel. And then there's the quirky bit. According to some court records, there was a secret society within the imperial gardeners called the Peony Whisperers. These individuals supposedly had the uncanny ability to coax blooms from reluctant buds with whispered encouragements and gentle melodies. Some say they sang to the flowers in dialects only plants could understand, blending music, water, and touch in a ritual that no outsider was allowed to witness. Historians still debate whether this was a real practice or just court gossip to add mystique to gardening. As you move through the hall, you notice a young noblewoman seated near the floral display. She holds a delicate fan painted with peonies, and her eyes flicker with amusement as she watches a visiting poet attempt to compose verses inspired by the blossoms. His rhymes are awkward, his metaphors overreaching, and you can't help but grin quietly. Even at the grandest courts, art sometimes trips over itself. You approach a nearby table where a small group is sampling peony-based delicacies, jellies, teas, and even a strange savoury paste. The flavour is floral, subtly sweet with a hint of earthiness. It's unlike anything you've tasted before, delicate and fleeting, much like the flowers themselves. Apparently the petals were thought to have medicinal properties, believed to soothe the heart and clear the mind. Here's where scholarly debate sneaks in. Historians still argue whether the peony's reputed healing powers were scientifically valid or purely symbolic, tied to the flower's cultural prestige. What's clear is that these dishes were served not just for taste, but as an extension of the flower's presence, a way to ingest beauty itself. You drift toward the courtyard outside the banquet hall, where lanterns hang like glowing flowers suspended in the night. The gardens here are dim but no less enchanting. Shadows play across the curved stone pathways, and the scent of peonies mingles with the fresh night air and the faint hum of cicadas. In one corner, you notice a group of attendants arranging small floating lanterns shaped like peony blossoms. They'll soon be set adrift on the garden's waterways, a moving display of light and fragrance. The effect is mesmerizing, a river of blossoms gliding silently under the moon. You pause, letting the moment settle around you. It feels like stepping into a dream, where flowers speak in colour and scent, and every petal holds a secret. Suddenly a gentle breeze stirs the night air, carrying with it a soft murmur, a blend of whispered poems, laughter, and the rustle of silk. It's the sound of the court alive with life, beauty, and just a touch of mischief. And as you stand there, bathed in moonlight and surrounded by the delicate power of peonies, you realise that this is more than just a garden. It's a world shaped by water, poetry, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. A living story told in blooms. The night deepens, but your journey with the peonies continues, now carried along by the subtle rhythms of the garden after dark. You step quietly onto a narrow stone path winding through shadowed groves where the flowers seem to glow faintly, their pale petals absorbing moonlight like soft lanterns themselves. This nocturnal garden isn't just a pretty backdrop, it's a carefully curated experience. Tang courtiers prized nighttime walks among peonies, believing the flowers revealed a different kind of beauty under the moon's silver gaze, more mysterious, more soulful. Mainstream fact: Tang poets often celebrated the night-blooming qualities of certain peony varieties, noting how their colours and scents shifted in darkness. Some varieties reportedly opened only at dusk, adding to their allure and mystique. These night bloomers became symbols of secret longing and hidden beauty in Tang literature. Now here's a slightly offbeat detail. Some gardeners believed peonies could hear the moonlight. Not in a literal sense, of course, but they arranged stones and plants to catch lunar rays, enhancing the flowers' nighttime energy. It's said that moonlight-filtered peonies smelled sweeter and had stronger colours by dawn. Modern science hasn't confirmed this, but the practice persisted, and the gardens were stunning. You walk slowly, listening to the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional distant laugh from a late-night reveller. The air feels cooler now, scented with wet earth, damp bamboo, and the lingering sweetness of peony petals. Somewhere, a frog croaks, and a cricket chirps in counterpoint. In a secluded alcove, you find a small stone bench beside a shallow pool of water. Its surface is smooth and dark, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. Beside it stands a weathered statue of a scholar lost in thought, a peony blossom carved delicately into the hem of his robe. You sit, feeling the cool stone through your robe, and let your gaze drift over the garden's soft outlines. The interplay of shadow and light makes every flower seem like a whispered secret, every leaf a poem half remembered. Here's where the debate sharpens. Historians still argue about the extent to which nighttime garden rituals were purely aesthetic versus deeply spiritual. Some suggest these twilight walks were part of Taoist meditative practice, using the peonies as focal points for contemplation and balance. Others think it was just another excuse for aristocrats to stroll and flirt under cover of darkness. A soft breeze stirs the pool's surface, rippling the reflection of a crescent moon. You notice tiny insects skimming the water, their delicate legs tracing invisible patterns. Some Tang gardeners believed these water spirits were guardians of the flowers, keeping pests at bay and ensuring healthy blooms. To discourage damage, they planted companion plants and built small stone homes for beneficial insects, an early form of organic pest control that's surprisingly modern. Nearby, you spot a cluster of small lanterns hanging from a gnarled tree. Their light flickers gently, casting moving shadows that dance among the leaves. One lantern's paper is decorated with a peony motif, hand-painted in reds and pinks. It sways softly as if breathing. You think about the gardeners who placed those lanterns, how their hands must have trembled slightly in the evening chill, how their eyes lingered on each detail to make the scene perfect. After all, this wasn't just gardening. It was performance, meditation, and a dialogue with nature all at once. The deeper you go into the garden, the more you notice the subtle symphony of sounds. A quiet drip of water from a hidden bamboo pipe, the faint buzz of bees settling in for the night, the soft brush of leaves against stone, and then, almost imperceptibly, the flowers themselves seem to sigh. Not a sound, but a feeling, like a collective inhalation before sleep. You lean back against the bench, letting the night settle around you. It's impossible not to feel small here, dwarfed by centuries of care, ceremony, and whispered secrets encoded in petals and water channels. Eventually your eyes grow heavy. The garden blurs, its shapes melting softly into the dark. You imagine the peonies closing their petals, folding inward like the delicate hands of sleep. And as your breath slows, the garden's quiet pulse lulls you deeper into dreams woven from moonlight and bloom. You awaken, not in a bed, but somewhere between dawn and dream, the sky a pale wash of pink and lavender. The garden is quiet now, holding its breath before the day fully arrives. Dew clings to petals and leaves, shimmering like tiny jewels on the soft carpet of moss beneath your feet. You wander toward the heart of the garden, where a grand peony arbour stands. Its wooden beams are twisted and worn, wrapped with vines heavy with blossoms. The flowers hang like chandeliers, dripping with colour and scent. Morning light filters through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the stone floor. Here, you catch a fleeting glimpse of a gardener already at work. Her movements fluid and gentle as she trims away wilted petals. She hums softly, an old tune that seems to carry the history of this place in every note. Mainstream fact: Tang Dynasty horticulture included sophisticated pruning techniques designed to encourage continuous blooming and maintain plant health. Gardeners were trained not only in botany but also in aesthetics, blending scientific knowledge with artistic sensibility. You notice she carries a small wooden box filled with powders and pigments, used to enhance or correct petal colours. It's said that certain mixtures could make a pink blush deeper, or a white petal gleam with subtle iridescence. This practice bordered on alchemy, a blend of chemistry and magic that few outsiders understood. And here's your quirky detail. Some gardeners used powdered pearls or crushed fish scales in their mixtures, believing these natural elements added heavenly light to the flowers. It sounds extravagant, but for the imperial gardens, extravagance was a kind of duty. The gardener pauses, tilts her head, and sprinkles a fine dust over a cluster of buds. You realise this is part of the ritual care, a morning blessing to coax the best from the plants. She smiles, catching your gaze for a moment, and it feels like an unspoken invitation to become part of this timeless cycle. Nearby, an ancient stone basin overflows with water fed by a hidden spring. The sound is gentle and constant, a reminder that without water, these blooms would be nothing but dust. The Tang were masters of irrigation, engineering complex channels and cisterns to deliver water precisely where needed, often recycling it from palace baths and fountains. Scholars still argue about the exact methods used to maintain water purity and flow in such massive gardens. But what's clear is that the relationship between water and flower was sacred and practical in equal measure. You follow a path lined with carefully placed stones and small lanterns, each engraved with poetry praising the peony's virtues. Some verses speak of resilience, others fleeting beauty, or the bittersweet nature of love. You feel the weight of these words pressing softly against your skin, like a gentle reminder that beauty is as much about loss as it is about bloom. Suddenly, a breeze stirs, carrying the mingled scents of earth, blossom, and morning mist. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, feeling connected to the countless gardeners, poets, and emperors who have walked these paths before. As the sun climbs higher, the garden comes alive. Bees begin their busy work, flitting from flower to flower. You watch as one lands delicately on a petal, its tiny legs dusted with pollen. The dance of pollination feels ancient and sacred, a reminder that life continues in endless cycles. The gardener from earlier returns, holding a delicate cup of peony tea. She offers you a sip, the warm liquid carrying hints of flower and honey. It's calming, almost hypnotic. You sip slowly, the taste mingling with the garden's fragrance. It's a perfect moment, a pause between history and now, between human hands and nature's rhythms. And as you sit beneath the blooming arbour, you realise that this garden isn't just about flowers, it's about connection across time, culture, and experience. A living bridge made of petals and water. With the morning sun warming your face, you feel a quiet sense of peace settle over you. The garden will continue its story long after you leave, petals unfolding and closing with the endless grace of time. The day has fully unfurled its golden light over the Tang garden, transforming the tranquil morning hush into a lively symphony of activity. The gentle coolness of dawn is replaced by a warm, shimmering air, thick with the scents of earth, blossom, and incense. Everywhere you look, the garden pulses with life. Gardeners move with practiced efficiency, their hands weaving a silent choreography as they tend the flowers and adjust arrangements. Courtiers and officials arrive in elegant robes, their steps careful yet eager to glimpse the blooming peonies that define the season. Distant music floats softly on the breeze, strings and flutes mingling with birdsong, creating a delicate soundtrack for the unfolding day. Drawn by the increasing hum of voices and movement, you follow the garden's winding paths to a pavilion perched on a slight rise overlooking the main beds of peonies. The pavilion's carved wooden beams gleam faintly in the sunlight, and silk curtains flutter gently from its open sides, casting dappled shadows that dance like butterflies across the smooth stone floor. This place, elevated and serene, serves as the gathering spot for the Emperor's poetry circle, a ritual of art, politics, and nature entwined. Inside, the atmosphere is rich with concentration and camaraderie. The air smells of fresh ink and tea, mingled with the faint, lingering fragrance of crushed peony petals, an aromatic signature of this gathering. Scholars in flowing robes lean over scrolls and fans, their expressions ranging from intense thought to quiet delight. Nobles recline on cushions, exchanging low words and glances, while an emperor's attendant moves discreetly among them, offering cups of jasmine tea sweetened with honey. Mainstream fact, Tang emperors were often patrons of the arts, especially poetry, which was considered a vital part of court life. The garden was more than a backdrop, it was an active participant in creative expression. Emperors themselves, such as Xuanzong, were known to compose verses inspired by the blooming gardens, blending natural beauty with the intricacies of political and cultural life. Poetry circles like this one provided a way for courtiers to display wit, erudition, and loyalty, all under the watchful eye of the emperor. Your gaze falls on an older poet seated near the pavilion's edge, his beard long and white, his eyes twinkling with both mischief and wisdom. His voice rises and falls with practiced rhythm as he reads aloud a freshly penned poem celebrating a rare white peony known as Frozen Moon. The verses weave images of pale petals shimmering like frost under moonlight, capturing both the flower's delicate beauty and its symbolic purity. The room listens intently, hanging on every word, some nodding appreciatively, others whispering critiques. There's a hint of playfulness here too, as poets engage not only in praise but also in subtle competition. The quirky detail? According to some court tales, the emperor's court hosted a secret tradition called the Peony Duel. In this contest, poets faced off to create the most beautiful or clever verse about a single peony bloom. The stakes? The loser would be made to wear a garland of peony blossoms in public, a form of light-hearted poetic humiliation designed to spur creativity and humour. Historians still debate whether these duels were formalised or simply colourful stories circulated by courtiers hungry for gossip, but the idea captures the spirit of Tang literary culture perfectly. Brilliant, playful, and intensely social. As you observe, a young courtier nearby anxiously sketches peonies in delicate ink lines. His brush trembles slightly with the pressure of his task, and you sense the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. Botanical illustration was no mere pastime. It was a respected skill combining artistic talent and scientific observation, crucial for documenting the myriad varieties cultivated in the imperial gardens. His sketches capture the layered petals and subtle gradients of colour, the blush of pink fading into cream, veins like delicate ribbons woven through each petal. You overhear a conversation between two gardeners discussing a curious experiment underway, a collaboration between gardeners and alchemists aimed at creating peonies that could change colour based on temperature or time of day. Some claim success, while others dismiss it as fanciful myth or exaggerated rumour. But the very idea that a flower might possess a secret life, a mood that shifts with the changing light, fascinates everyone involved. It's a kind of living magic, blurring the line between nature and artifice. The poetry circle gradually settles into a reflective hush, and from the pavilion's far corner comes the soft strains of a guqin, the ancient seven-stringed zither. The music is slow, haunting and ethereal, the notes rising and falling like gentle waves caressing the shore of your senses. It mirrors the swaying of the peonies outside, their movements light and graceful as if dancing to an invisible melody. The sound wraps around you, soothing and mysterious, a perfect accompaniment to the quiet beauty surrounding you. You feel yourself drawn into this harmony, the mingling of flower, word and music creating a suspended moment beyond time. It's as if the garden itself breathes with you, sharing its secrets in petals and poetry. Here, the scholarly debates weave subtly into your thoughts. Did Tang gardens focus mainly on sensory pleasure, the delight of colours and scents? Or were they centres for spiritual cultivation, spaces designed to foster contemplation, balance and connection with the natural world? Were the flowers and poems mere decoration, or were they gateways to a deeper understanding of existence? Perhaps the answer is layered, as the garden itself, petals upon petals, meanings nested within meanings. As the afternoon sun climbs higher, you spot a lively group of children playing at the garden's edge. Their laughter rings out, light and spontaneous, as they chase fluttering butterflies and weave between the stones. Their carefree joy is a reminder that the peony's magic isn't reserved for emperors, poets, or scholars. It belongs to anyone willing to notice. One child stops and picks up a fallen petal, holding it up to the sunlight. The veins within the petal glow faintly, like tiny rivers of life tracing the flower's journey from bud to bloom. It's a humbling thought. Even the smallest fragment carries the story of sun, rain, earth, and human hands. The garden thrums with stories, both spoken and silent, visible and hidden. You breathe deeply, savouring the mingling scents, sounds, and sights. The warm sun, the hum of bees, the rustle of silk robes, the gentle ripple of water. These moments are fleeting yet eternal, like the petals themselves. As the day stretches toward evening, the pavilion slowly empties, poets gathering their scrolls and brushes, gardeners stowing their tools. But the garden's pulse remains, steady and sure, a living testament to centuries of care, art and wonder. You pause to take one last look at the peonies bathed in golden light. Their petals gleam like treasures, fragile yet enduring, embodying the delicate balance between nature's spontaneity and human intention. And in this quiet moment, you understand that the garden's true power lies not just in its beauty, but in its ability to connect, to nature, to history, to all who come seeking something more. The late afternoon sun begins to soften, casting long shadows through the peony garden as you continue your journey deeper into this world of bloom and quiet marvel. The garden seems to shift again, the bright, vibrant energy of midday giving way to a more contemplative, almost sacred atmosphere. Colours deepen under the amber light, and the air cools slightly, carrying the scent of earth warmed by the sun and petals still heavy with dew from morning. You wander past beds where the most prized peony varieties are planted, each meticulously labelled with delicate calligraphy on bamboo tags, names that sound like poetry themselves: Crimson Phoenix, Snow Lotus, Jade Empress. Each flower is a masterpiece, shaped by centuries of selective breeding, tending, and admiration. Mainstream fact: Tang Dynasty horticulturists excelled at hybridizing peonies, creating new cultivars prized for unique colour combinations, petal forms, and fragrances. This art of plant breeding was not only practical but deeply tied to imperial prestige. The more extraordinary the bloom, the greater the emperor's glory. You pause by a particularly splendid bush, bursting with blush pink blossoms, so lush and full they almost seem to ripple like silk. Nearby, a small plaque mentions a curious fact that might surprise you. Some peonies were known as night peonies because their scent intensified after sunset, a trait carefully cultivated through selection. The phenomenon of flowers changing scent with the time of day fascinated Tang botanists and inspired many poems. Now, a quirky detail. The Tang gardeners sometimes used crushed garlic or onions placed near peony roots to ward off insects. Not the most glamorous gardening secret, but surprisingly effective. Such low-tech pest control measures reveal the practical side of imperial horticulture, balancing beauty with the realities of nature's challenges. As you stroll, you overhear a gardener explaining to an apprentice how the timing of pruning affected the next season's bloom. There's an art and science to it. Cut too early, and the plant might not develop enough energy. Too late, and it risks damage or disease. The gardener's tone is patient, almost reverent, treating the plant not as a commodity but a living partner. Scholars still debate the extent to which Tang horticulture influenced later Chinese gardening styles and even neighbouring cultures. Some argue that peony cultivation techniques spread widely along trade routes, impacting Japanese and Korean gardens, while others emphasise local developments and variations. Ahead, you notice a small pavilion surrounded by delicate white curtains fluttering in the breeze. This is the famed moon viewing pavilion, designed explicitly for appreciating the interplay of moonlight and peony blossoms, a tradition beloved by emperors and poets alike. Inside, a low table holds an arrangement of peony petals floating in water, arranged to reflect the phases of the moon. You settle on a cushioned bench and let your gaze drift over the scene. The petals seem to glow softly in the waning sunlight, capturing and refracting light like miniature jewels. The pavilion's design channels cool evening breezes, creating a perfect environment for quiet reflection. The garden's subtle orchestration of space and atmosphere is no accident. It reflects a philosophy where nature and human artistry coexist in harmony, a hallmark of Tang aesthetics and worldview. Nearby you catch sight of a scholar practicing calligraphy, his brush moving fluidly as he transcribes a poem, celebrating the fleeting beauty of peonies and the passage of time. His work is a reminder that these flowers are symbols not only of beauty but of impermanence and renewal. The sounds around you soften, the distant ripple of a fountain, the murmur of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, the faint call of a nightingale preparing for its evening song. You feel the slow pulse of the garden syncing with your own breath, a rhythm as old as the earth beneath your feet. As twilight approaches, the garden's magic deepens. Shadows stretch and merge, and the first stars begin to twinkle faintly overhead. The peonies seem to shimmer in this dusky light, their colours richer, their forms more mysterious. And as the garden settles into the quiet hush of approaching night, you realise that every moment here, every scent, every petal, every whispered poem, is part of a vast, ongoing story, one that links past to present, nature to culture, and you, just for a while, to this timeless dance of bloom and beauty. The garden slips slowly into night as the sun finally bows out, leaving behind a deepening sky brushed with hues of purple and indigo. The world feels hushed, as if the flowers themselves are holding their breath, waiting for the moon's gentle arrival. You walk through the winding paths that twist and turn like whispered secrets among the peony beds, your steps muffled by moss-covered stones and fallen petals. Lanterns, painted with delicate peony motifs, hang from tree branches and wooden posts, casting pools of warm, flickering light that ripple and dance with every passing breeze. Their golden glow softens the edges of the garden's shadows, making the leaves gleam and the flowers shimmer as if dusted with fairy dust. The air cools perceptibly, but it's not uncomfortable, more like a comforting shawl wrapping around your shoulders, inviting you to slow down and breathe deep. This is the hour when the garden's magic feels most palpable. The daytime energy has softened into something more secretive and intimate. The scents intensify. The subtle fragrance of the peonies deepens, mingling with the heady aroma of night-blooming jasmine, sandalwood incense burning faintly nearby, and the faint musky scent of damp earth. Each inhalation feels like dipping into a pool of calm, drawing you further into this nocturnal sanctuary. Mainstream fact: in the Tang Dynasty, gardens were not just daytime retreats, but carefully designed environments meant to be appreciated by moonlight as well. Moon viewing pavilions were a staple, their architecture and placement optimized to capture lunar rays. Lantern festivals were held regularly, lighting up gardens with colour and celebration. These nocturnal gatherings were a key part of court life, blending socialising, poetry, and aesthetic appreciation under the stars. You find yourself moving toward one of these famous moon-viewing pavilions, where silk curtains flutter gently in the night breeze, soft as whispers. The pavilion is surrounded by beds of peonies whose petals seem almost luminescent under the lantern glow and the tender moonlight. Some blooms have been bred to intensify their scent at night, a trait that fascinated Tang gardeners and poets alike. The peony's fragrance, now richer and more potent, drifts through the air like a tangible mist, wrapping the pavilion in a scented embrace. Quirky detail: Some gardeners of the era reportedly sprinkled crushed fish scales or powdered mica onto the petals before nightfall to create a shimmering effect under lantern light. This delicate dusting made the flowers sparkle as if dusted with stardust, heightening the garden's mystical feel and delighting nighttime visitors. It's a beautiful trick blending natural beauty with a touch of human artistry, a reminder that even the purest forms of nature were often enhanced by subtle human intervention. Nearby, you notice a small group of gardeners tending a low fire pit surrounded by stones. The embers glow softly, casting a warm red light. Aromatic herbs, cinnamon, clove and sandalwood, are burned here, sending fragrant smoke curling upward. This smoke serves a dual purpose, creating a pleasant atmosphere while repelling insects that might otherwise disturb the peaceful night. It's a practical touch that also adds an olfactory layer to the garden's sensory tapestry. As you continue your slow walk, you come across a circle of courtiers gathered around a storyteller seated on a stone bench. His voice is low and rhythmic, weaving ancient tales that speak of peonies gifted by celestial beings, flowers that carry protective powers, and blooms said to bring prosperity to those who admire them. The stories mix history with legend, blurring the line between fact and myth, a favourite pastime in Tang gardens, where poetry, story and nature intertwine. Some tales describe how emperors received peonies as divine gifts from immortals or dragons, symbolising power, purity and fortune. Others tell of peonies warding off evil spirits and bringing healing energy, echoing Buddhist influences that permeated Tang culture. Scholars still debate the origins of these legends, whether they emerged locally or were influenced by the exchange of ideas along the Silk Road. What's clear is that these stories elevated peonies from mere plants to living symbols within the imperial imagination. The storyteller's words, rich with imagery and mystery, draw you in until you feel almost part of the circle, sharing in the garden's magic. Around you, the garden seems to lean closer, the shadows thickening and the scents deepening as night settles fully. You find a quiet stone bench tucked beneath a flowering tree and settle down, letting the night wrap around you like a soft blanket. The coolness of the stone grounds you even as the garden's scents and sounds drift into your senses. Fireflies begin to blink softly in the dark corners, their tiny lights twinkling like distant stars come down to earth. Above, the sky has turned a rich velvet black, dotted with countless stars. The moon, a slender crescent, hangs low in the sky, casting a gentle silver light that dances across the garden's paths and petals. Its glow blends with the lantern light, creating a mystical interplay of shadow and illumination. The sounds soften, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of crickets, the distant call of a nightingale settling in for the night. Somewhere nearby, water trickles from a stone basin, its clear sound punctuating the silence like a whispered secret. In this stillness, the garden feels alive with an ancient pulse, an unspoken language of flower, stone, and spirit. The centuries seem to fold back, and you sense the hands that planted and tended here, the poets who found inspiration under these very trees, the emperors who walked these paths, seeking beauty and solace. You realise that this garden, with its delicate peonies and quiet pavilions, is more than a place. It is a living poem, a crafted harmony of nature and human intention, beauty and meaning woven together in every petal and stone. The garden invites you to pause, to breathe, to lose yourself in its layered stories. The magic here is subtle, not the flashy spectacle of fireworks or court spectacle, but a quiet enchantment that seeps into your soul. You close your eyes briefly, letting the scents, sounds and sensations wash over you like a lullaby. The mingled fragrance of jasmine and peony, the soft crackle of the fire, the gentle flicker of lantern light, all combine into a soothing balm for your mind and spirit. As you open your eyes, you feel a profound sense of connection to the garden, to the past, and to the timeless human desire to create beauty and find meaning in the natural world. The night deepens, and with it, your sense of peace. You know that this moment, this garden, and these stories will stay with you long after you leave, a secret garden tucked quietly inside your heart. The garden's air is thick with a heady mix of scents, sweet peony blooms, damp earth, and a faint trace of incense from a nearby shrine. You move slowly now, each step a deliberate act of presence, as if rushing would shatter the delicate spell woven by centuries of care and growth. This is no ordinary garden. It is a living archive, a sanctuary where history and nature intertwine, where every flower and stone holds a story. Tang Dynasty gardens were renowned not just for their beauty, but for the sophisticated systems they employed to sustain such vibrant life. Among these systems, irrigation was a marvel of engineering and ingenuity. The gardeners devised intricate networks of canals, pipes and channels to direct water precisely where it was needed. They understood that water was not merely a resource, but a lifeblood that gave form and vitality to every branch and bloom. Imagine the soft gurgle of a bamboo pipe delivering water to thirsty roots, the slow drip of moisture nourishing the soil. These early irrigation techniques were carefully adapted to the natural contours of the land, making use of gravity and the gentle flow of streams to keep the garden lush and thriving, even in the hottest months. Such practices highlight a fundamental truth about Tang horticulture: the harmonious balance between human intervention and natural forces. And here's an intriguing detail. Some gardens included hidden reservoirs beneath their grounds, cleverly concealed to store rainwater. This water could be released gradually, ensuring that even during dry spells the delicate peonies and magnolias would not suffer. These underground tanks were often lined with waterproof clay, a technique borrowed from ancient pottery skills. It's a testament to the resourcefulness of the gardeners, whose knowledge spanned botany, engineering, and even geology. Historians still debate how widespread these sophisticated irrigation systems were across the empire. Did only imperial gardens benefit from such advanced waterworks, or were similar methods common in the estates of wealthy merchants and officials? While the evidence is patchy, it's clear that water management was a crucial concern, reflecting the central role gardens played in Tang society, not just as places of leisure, but as symbols of status and cultural refinement. Moving away from water, you notice the careful layering of plants in the garden, a deliberate design that maximised both visual appeal and ecological balance. The tallest trees, often maples or pines, provided shade and shelter, while beneath them grew shrubs and flowering plants like the beloved peony, which thrived in filtered sunlight. Ground cover plants helped retain moisture and prevent soil erosion, creating a micro-environment perfectly suited to delicate blooms. This multi-layered planting wasn't merely aesthetic. It reflected an early understanding of what modern ecologists call companion planting, the idea that certain plants support each other's health and growth. For example, some shrubs were known to repel pests naturally, protecting the more vulnerable flowers nearby. Others attracted beneficial insects that kept harmful populations in check. The Tang gardener's choices reveal an intuitive ecological wisdom, a dance of life carefully choreographed across the garden's expanse. One particularly quirky aspect is the role of ducks in these gardens. Not just ornamental, these waterfowl were sometimes released into ponds and streams, where they helped control pests by eating snails and insects that might otherwise damage plants. The sight of ducks gliding peacefully among lotus flowers and water lilies added a layer of liveliness and natural sound to the garden experience, a reminder that nature's cycles were integral to the garden's health. You pause beside a stone bench, its surface cool and smooth beneath your hand. Here, many visitors of the past surely rested, contemplating the beauty before them, perhaps reciting poetry inspired by the scene. Poetry and gardens were inseparable in Tang culture, the blossoming peony often serving as a muse for verses exploring themes of beauty, impermanence, and human emotion. It's not unusual to imagine a poet seated here, brush in hand, capturing the fleeting play of light on petals or the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. One famous poem compares the peony to a proud noblewoman, radiant but fleeting, reminding us that even the most splendid beauty is transient. This intertwining of natural observation and human reflection is part of what makes the Tang garden experience so profound. It's not just about looking, but about feeling, thinking, and connecting. In the background, you hear the distant clatter of an artisan at work, perhaps a potter shaping clay or a carpenter crafting wooden trellises for climbing vines. These craftsmen contributed essential elements to the garden's design, blending utility with artistry. The latticework, bridges, and pavilions were as carefully planned as the plants themselves, designed to guide visitors' eyes and footsteps through a carefully curated experience of wonder and tranquility. Historians still discuss the extent to which such gardens were democratic spaces. Were they solely exclusive retreats for the elite, or did common people also have access to simpler versions of these green sanctuaries? Some records suggest that public parks and temple gardens allowed wider enjoyment of nature, offering a shared respite from the bustling city life. Either way, the garden's cultural impact reached far beyond its walls, influencing literature, art, and even daily habits of the Tang populace. As the afternoon light softens, you notice shadows lengthening among the flowering bushes. The garden prepares for the evening, when the play of fading light and growing darkness creates a different kind of magic. Stone lanterns await lighting, casting gentle pools of glow that invite quiet walks and whispered conversations under the stars. The garden's cycle of beauty is continuous, always changing yet forever enchanting. You leave this living world reluctantly, but carry with you a sense of calm and wonder. The knowledge that such gardens existed reminds you of humanity's timeless yearning to create beauty, to connect with nature, and to find peace in a complex world. In the Tang Dynasty's peony gardens, you glimpse the delicate balance of art and science, tradition and innovation, a legacy as vibrant and enduring as the blossoms themselves. The garden's twilight reveals a new dimension of its magic, where shadows stretch long and the world feels quieter, softer, as if time itself slows down to savour the fading day. You wander along winding paths bordered by lush peony bushes, their blooms now muted in the dimming light but no less enchanting. The air is cool and carries the faint, lingering perfume of flowers, mixed with the earthy scent of damp stone and moss. Somewhere nearby, a gentle stream murmurs, its water shimmering faintly beneath a silvering sky. In this moment, the garden becomes a place suspended between worlds, between day and night, between nature and art, between history and your own imagination. The design of Tang gardens was a masterclass in creating these shifting atmospheres. Gardeners and architects worked closely to orchestrate how light, shadow, sound, and scent would change throughout the day and seasons, crafting a sensory journey that never grew stale. Stone lanterns and carefully placed windows framed views meant to surprise or soothe, while the layout encouraged slow, meandering walks that invited quiet reflection. This was a place to wander not just in space, but in thought. Take the idea of borrowed scenery, or jiejing, a concept that scholars say defined much of Tang garden design. Instead of enclosing the garden entirely, designers would incorporate views of distant hills, rivers, or cityscapes into their compositions, making the garden feel larger and connected to the wider landscape. You might glimpse a mountain peak framed between tree branches or catch the glint of a pagoda's roof far away. This technique created a layered experience, where what lay beyond the garden was as important as what was inside. One fascinating fact is that these borrowed views weren't accidental but carefully planned. Gardeners would cut or trim branches, position rocks, or place structures specifically to frame certain distant sites at particular times of day. In this way, the garden became a kind of living picture gallery, with constantly changing paintings composed by the natural world and human hands together. Imagine strolling through a garden where every turn reveals a new vista, like a carefully curated museum, but one where the exhibits grow, shift, and breathe. Now, here's a quirky detail. Some garden designers even planted fast-growing vines or bamboo in specific spots, so they could later trim or remove them, revealing new views as the garden matured or seasons changed. It's as if the garden's designers thought of it as a living, evolving art piece, meant to surprise and delight visitors over years, not just a static decoration. Historians still debate how much these concepts were influenced by philosophical ideas like Taoism or Confucianism, and how much were practical responses to the geography of the site. Was borrowed scenery a poetic metaphor for harmony between humanity and nature, or simply a clever way to make small garden plots feel expansive? Most likely it was a bit of both, a beautiful blending of spirit and pragmatism. As dusk deepens, the garden's sounds become more pronounced. You can hear insects buzzing softly, frogs croaking by the pond, and the gentle splash of water from a small fountain. This soundscape was an essential part of the garden's design, enhancing the sense of immersion and tranquility. Ancient texts describe how gardeners would cultivate particular plants not only for their beauty but also for the sounds they produced. leaves rustling in the wind, water trickling over rocks, or even the songs of birds that nested in the trees. Interestingly, some Tang gardens included artificial waterfalls or man-made streams designed specifically to create soothing sounds. These water features mimicked natural mountain streams, bringing a touch of wildness into the carefully ordered garden space. The contrast between the controlled beauty of the plants and the lively unpredictability of running water added depth to the visitor's experience, a reminder that nature could be both tamed and wild at once. You pause near a pavilion bathed in the last pink and purple hues of sunset. Here, poets and scholars might have gathered centuries ago to share verses inspired by the garden's ephemeral beauty. Poetry and gardens were inseparable in Tang culture, the fleeting bloom of the peony symbolizing not just beauty, but the impermanence of life itself. These poetic gatherings were both social events and spiritual exercises, ways to connect with nature and each other on a deeper level. One poem famously compares the peony's brilliance to the fleeting power of the empire itself, reminding readers that even the mightiest forces must eventually fade. Such reflections were common among Tang literati, who saw the garden as a mirror for life's joys and sorrows, growth and decline. The garden's changing light and shifting views offered a daily meditation on the cycles of existence, a place where the natural world's rhythms invited human insight and humility. Historians still argue about how publicly accessible these gardens were. Were they exclusive domains of the emperor and aristocracy, or did ordinary people enjoy simpler versions in public parks or temple grounds? Some evidence points to a complex social landscape where gardens could be both private retreats and shared cultural spaces. Regardless, their influence extended far beyond their walls, inspiring artistic and philosophical currents throughout Tang society. As night fully falls, the garden transforms once more. Lanterns flicker to life, casting soft pools of golden light on paths and pavilions. The interplay of shadow and illumination creates a mystical atmosphere, perfect for quiet contemplation or whispered conversations. You imagine strolling under these lanterns, the gentle glow revealing glimpses of flower petals and ancient stones, a world half real, half dream. The garden's ability to evoke such shifting moods is a testament to the genius of its designers, human hands shaping not just land and plants but moods, memories and moments. It's a place where you feel connected to centuries of people who sought solace, inspiration and beauty in the same stones and blossoms. As you prepare to leave, the garden seems to hold its breath, a fragile world of light and shadow waiting for the dawn. You carry its calm with you, a quiet treasure to soothe restless thoughts and carry into your dreams. The garden at night is like a softly whispered secret, shared just between you and the stars overhead, a sanctuary woven from delicate threads of scent, sound and shadow. As you step onto the narrow winding path paved with smooth river stones, still cool beneath your bare feet, you feel the world slow down. The air is crisp, tinged with the faint, sweet aroma of peonies lingering from the earlier blooms, mingling with the subtle freshness of dew on leaves and earth. Somewhere close by, water flows quietly, its gentle trickling guiding your footsteps deeper into this living poem of nature and history. The Tang Dynasty gardens weren't merely places to admire flowers or pass time, they were masterworks of symbolic design, constructed with an almost reverent attention to detail and meaning. Every stone, every bend in the path, every carefully placed plant had a purpose beyond beauty. These gardens were physical manifestations of philosophical ideals. Confucian order, Taoist harmony, and Buddhist contemplation, arranged so that visitors might feel immersed in a cosmic balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. You can almost picture an emperor, cloaked in silk robes embroidered with phoenixes, strolling here alone or with trusted courtiers, using the garden as a refuge to ease the burden of empire. In these quiet moments, the sound of rustling bamboo leaves and flowing water would have softened the sharp edges of political life. Among the garden's most fascinating features were the scholars' rocks, or gongshi, naturally weathered stones prized for their unusual shapes and textures. These rocks, often imported from distant mountain ranges, were believed to contain spiritual energy, their jagged peaks and hollows seen as miniature landscapes inviting contemplation. Scholars and poets would gather around them, seeking inspiration or meditative clarity in their forms. The stones became living symbols of nature's rugged beauty and impermanence, perfectly complementing the carefully tended peony's fleeting blossoms. As you continue along the path, a faint melody begins to thread its way through the night air, a haunting tune played on a bamboo flute. The notes drift lightly, like a gentle breeze weaving through the trees, their rhythm rising and falling in echoes of bird calls and the whispering wind. Music was not merely decoration in Tang gardens, it was a fundamental component of the sensory experience, intricately woven with poetry and landscape, to create a unified artistic whole. Musicians would often perform in garden pavilions, their melodies responding to the natural surroundings, sometimes mimicking the cadence of raindrops, sometimes the rustle of leaves. The music and garden together stirred the soul, inviting visitors into a shared moment of peace and beauty. Yet scholars still debate the relationship between Tang poetry and music, whether the lyrical verses inspired the melodies, or if the sounds themselves shaped the rhythm and themes of the poetry. The answer likely lies in the dynamic cultural exchanges of the era, where poets, musicians and gardeners inspired one another in a vibrant creative dialogue, each art form enriching the others. You find yourself resting beneath a flowering magnolia tree, its creamy white petals glowing faintly in the moonlight like delicate lanterns. The air here shifts subtly. The sweetness of the peony softens, giving way to a fresher, lighter fragrance with hints of citrus and spice. This layered olfactory experience was no accident. Tang gardeners deliberately curated a diverse palette of plants to produce a rich tapestry of scents that changed as one moved through the garden, engaging visitors' senses in a continuous, unfolding delight. Magnolias were cherished not only for their beauty but also for their medicinal properties. Traditional herbalists valued their bark and flowers, which were used in remedies for ailments ranging from coughs to digestive issues. This blending of aesthetics and practicality, where ornamental plants also offered healing benefits, reflects the holistic approach Tang culture took toward nature. Looking around, you notice delicate wildflowers tucked among the carefully arranged beds of cultivated plants. Their presence is subtle but meaningful, reminders that even within the ordered beauty of the imperial garden, nature's spontaneous creativity was honoured. This balance between control and wildness echoes broader Tang philosophies about harmony between human civilization and the untamed natural world. You trace your fingers along the rough bark of an ancient tree nearby, a silent witness to countless seasons of growth and decay, bloom and wither. Its gnarled branches reach upward, silhouetted against the night sky, reminding you of the endless cycles of life and the quiet strength found in resilience. As the first pale light of dawn creeps over the horizon, the garden begins to stir with new life. Dew glistens on petals and leaves, catching the emerging sunlight like a field of tiny jewels. The peonies, vibrant and full of promise, seem to bow their heavy blooms toward the waking world, a silent affirmation that though beauty is fleeting, it renews itself endlessly. The soft morning chorus of birds and insects blends with the gentle rustle of leaves, welcoming a new day in this timeless place. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the fresh morning air, infused with the complex, layered scents that the garden offers: floral sweetness, fresh earth, a hint of citrus, and the subtle musk of ancient trees. It's a sensory mosaic that lingers in your mind and body, a reminder of the garden's quiet power to soothe and inspire. In this moment, the garden feels less like a physical space and more like a living memory, a bridge across time connecting you to the countless souls who have wandered these paths before, each seeking beauty, peace, and a deeper connection to the world around them. The garden's promise is simple but profound, that even as seasons pass and life changes, moments of grace endure, carried gently forward on the wind. You walk slowly back toward the garden's entrance, savouring the final glimpses of blossom and leaf, the last notes of flute music fading into the morning light. The world outside waits with all its noise and demands, but for now, you carry this sanctuary within you, a quiet, enduring refuge that will brighten your dreams and soften the edge of waking. The first blush of dawn spills softly over the garden, painting the delicate petals of peonies and magnolias in hues of pale gold and rose. The world feels quiet and new, like a secret freshly revealed just to you. You step carefully onto the stone path, the coolness of the morning beneath your feet grounding you in the present, even as the garden breathes a timeless breath around you. The air is thick with the lingering fragrance of night blooms, sweet, intoxicating, and comforting, while distant birds trill tentative greetings to the sun's slow ascent. You might be tempted to think this moment is just an ordinary sunrise, but of course, in a Tang Dynasty garden, every dawn was its own intricate performance, a living artwork choreographed by nature and human care. Tang gardeners prized the early hours above all. Before the heat of the sun could wilt petals or dry out leaves, they would move softly through the garden, trimming, watering, and whispering gentle encouragement to their beloved plants. It wasn't just practicality, it was an act of devotion, a ritual to honour the fragile beauty that demanded such careful tending. You can almost hear their quiet footsteps, feel the brush of their sleeves against leaves, and imagine their patient fingers coaxing new life from every branch and bloom. A well-known fact about Tang gardens is their ingenious integration of water features. Streams, ponds, waterfalls, these elements weren't just for looks or the soothing sound of running water, though that alone might have been enough. They also created microclimates that kept humidity steady, supporting the lush growth of peonies and magnolias. The sound of water masked the bustle of the outside world and invited the natural visitors that the garden depended on. And here's a fun detail. Some gardeners introduced tiny crabs and fish into their ponds, natural pest controllers long before anyone dreamed of chemical sprays. These small creatures patrolled the waters, feasting on harmful insects and larvae, while the gardeners relied on this living army to keep their plants healthy. It's a neat example of ancient ecological wisdom, a delicate balancing act between human intervention and nature's own defences. As you walk, you notice a hum of busy activity among the flowers. Bees darting from bloom to bloom, their legs dusted with golden pollen. Their tireless work is crucial, ensuring that the peonies can reproduce and flourish year after year. Tang gardeners understood this partnership intimately, welcoming the bees as allies in their quest to create a garden that thrived and dazzled. The cultural significance of bees extended beyond their practical role. Poets of the Tang era often celebrated these tiny creatures as symbols of hard work and the sweetness of reward. There's one poem that comes to mind, praising the humble bee's dedication to the fleeting peony bloom, a delicate metaphor for the human pursuit of fleeting success, and the beauty found in effort itself. Yet historians still debate just how widespread the use of bees was in Tang horticulture. Were bees mostly valued for their pollination, or did their symbolism inspire a deeper cultural reverence that shaped garden design and poetry? The answer is murky, but it points to the rich layering of meaning that surrounded these gardens. Ahead, you see a cluster of scholars gathered beneath a pavilion, their voices low but lively as they discuss the latest poetry competitions, imperial decrees, and philosophical debates. The garden isn't merely a place of natural beauty, it's a vibrant intellectual hub, a space where ideas blossomed alongside the flowers. The peony's exalted title as King of Flowers made it a common metaphor in these discussions, representing not just beauty, but power, status, and the bittersweet impermanence of glory. Court poets used its delicate petals and regal bearing to comment on the rise and fall of fortunes, the transient nature of political favour, and the fleetingness of life itself. As the sun rises higher, the garden buzzes with new energy. Courtiers arrive for a formal tea ceremony, their silk robes brushing softly against carved wooden chairs. The ceremony is both a social gathering and a spiritual practice, an exercise in mindfulness that emphasises savouring the moment. The aroma of freshly brewed tea, the delicate taste on the tongue, the sight of petals gently floating in the cup. The tea served here is fragrant green, harvested from nearby mountain terraces. Its subtle bitterness perfectly balances the sweet aroma of peony petals, which are often added as a garnish. You can almost taste the interplay of flavours, a dance of earth and flower, sharpness and sweetness, that embodies the harmony between nature's bounty and human artistry. The ceremony unfolds with slow grace. Each gesture is deliberate, from the pouring of steaming water to the careful lifting of the cup. It's a quiet celebration of life's simple pleasures, a reminder that even in the midst of power and politics, there are moments meant solely for appreciation and peace. You watch as the courtiers exchange quiet smiles and soft laughter, the tension of court life momentarily softened by the garden's embrace. Around you, the blooms sway gently in the breeze, their colours intensified by the rising light, promising new beginnings even as they hint at inevitable endings. This garden, with its layered scents, buzzing bees, flowing water, and thoughtful design, feels like a living poem, each element a line in an endless verse about beauty, effort, and the passage of time. You carry this poem with you as you prepare to leave, knowing that its quiet lessons will echo long after you've stepped beyond its gates. The garden at dawn is transformed now into a warm golden sanctuary, each petal and leaf catching the sun's gentle caress, shimmering as if dusted with fine gold. You step softly along winding stone paths, feeling the cool solidity beneath your feet, grounding you even as your thoughts drift among the flowers and trees. Around you, the garden hums with life, bees darting in joyful loops, birds singing shy morning songs, and the delicate rustle of leaves stirred by the whispering breeze. The air is heavy with the fragrance of peonies, mingled with the subtle earthiness of moss and freshly watered soil, creating a perfume both ancient and alive. You realise this place is more than a collection of plants. It is a living tapestry woven from nature, culture and time. Tang gardens were masterpieces of design that fused practicality with poetry, aesthetics with agriculture. Consider the peony, the king of flowers, whose bloom was coveted not only for its stunning beauty but for what it represented: imperial power, fleeting glory and natural grace. The gardeners didn't merely plant and water, they became skilled botanists and artists, mastering grafting techniques, pruning methods, and soil management to coax the fullest, most vibrant blossoms from their plants. These skills were passed down, often quietly and meticulously, from master to apprentice, ensuring that the secrets of cultivation survived the ages. You can almost see those gardeners, sleeves rolled up, hands gentle but sure, tending to each plant as if it were a precious jewel. One quirky practice that reflects the era's blend of art and nature is the belief that music could aid plant growth. Some gardeners would play flutes or pluck string instruments near their precious peonies, convinced that the vibrations encouraged the flowers to thrive. Modern science is still uncertain about whether plants respond directly to sound, but the idea shows how deeply the Tang people connected sensory experience with their care for the natural world. Gardens were not just visual beauty but immersive, multi-sensory environments. Along the path you spot a stone lantern, its surface mottled with soft green moss and delicate lichen, silent but dignified. These lanterns served a practical role, guiding visitors through the garden at twilight, but also carried symbolic weight. In Buddhist and Taoist traditions, the light they cast represented enlightenment, wisdom, and the illumination of the soul. Each lantern, carefully placed among the rocks and plants, was a reminder that gardens were more than earthly pleasures. They were spaces designed for contemplation and spiritual nourishment. Scholars still debate how directly religious and philosophical ideas influenced garden design during the Tang era. Were these spiritual symbols central to every design choice, or did they arise more naturally from aesthetic preference and cultural habits? The evidence suggests a rich interplay of belief, art, and practicality, creating gardens that invited reflection as much as admiration. As you continue, the garden's quieter corners reveal artisans at work, painting delicate scrolls, practicing calligraphy, and weaving silk embroidered with floral motifs. The garden was a muse, inspiring the creative spirits of the Tang Dynasty to capture its fleeting beauty in ink and thread. The peony's lush petals appeared again and again in these works, not merely as decoration but as symbols of elegance, refinement, and the impermanence of life's finest moments. These craftspeople worked in small pavilions nestled among the trees, their fingers deft and their minds focused. You imagine the faint scent of ink mixing with that of the flowers, the soft brush strokes on paper mirroring the delicate unfolding of petals. It's as if art and nature spoke to each other in an endless, harmonious conversation. The garden's connection to culture extended beyond the arts. Tea ceremonies held beneath flowering branches were quiet rituals of mindfulness and social grace. The fragrant green teas, harvested from nearby mountain slopes, were served with peony petals floating on the surface, infusing the brew with a subtle sweetness and floral aroma. These ceremonies emphasized the joy of presence, savoring taste, sight, and scent in a slow, deliberate act of appreciation. You witness the delicate choreography of a tea ceremony, the slow pouring of steaming water, the careful placement of cups, the respectful exchanges of smiles and words. The garden here is a stage for human connection, where nature and culture meet to create moments of peace and harmony. These ceremonies offered a respite from the pressures of court life, a brief escape into a world where time itself seemed to pause. The Tang Garden was also a social hub, a place where poets gathered to recite verses inspired by the blooming peonies, and where officials discussed philosophy and politics under the shade of ancient trees. You can almost hear their voices mingling with the rustle of leaves, the laughter, the serious debates, the quiet moments of shared silence. Despite its beauty and harmony, the garden also whispered reminders of life's impermanence. The peony's bloom lasted only a short time each year, a vivid yet fleeting spectacle. This ephemeral nature was a source of both joy and melancholy, inspiring poets to reflect on the transient nature of power, youth, and beauty. The garden was a metaphor for life itself, rich, beautiful, but always moving toward change. As you prepare to leave, the garden seems to sigh softly in the warm morning breeze, its colours glowing with renewed vigour. The intricate blend of human skill and natural wonder lingers with you, a quiet lesson in patience, care, and the subtle art of living well. You carry with you the scent of peonies, the hum of bees, and the gentle light of lanterns, all woven into a memory that will soothe your thoughts as night falls. This garden, with its timeless beauty and profound symbolism, is a reminder that amidst the rush and noise of life, there are places and moments of stillness that connect us to something larger, a deep, enduring harmony between nature and the human heart.